Hey everyone, this is David March here for another episode of the Growth Mindset Podcast. Of course, I'm your host. This is the second season, and if you've been following along, we bring on all different types of entrepreneurs, talking about their business, talking about how we're growing together. Of course, my business is Innovative Marketing Solutions, and our guest today is Michael. They call him Rodie and Rodenberg, Michael Rodenberg. So, Michael, why don't you introduce yourself, your company, and let's get to it here.
Yeah, thank you, David. And my name is Mikel Rodenberg. Everybody calls me Rodie. It's been a kind of a funny or just a family nickname, actually. My dad was Rodie Jr. His oldest brother was the original Rodie, so it's stuck around for a while. But yeah, my company is called Parable Talent. I just launched it June of 2025, so just over a year now. And I've been in the recruiting industry for about 14 plus years from larger firms, and just launched the last year. So it's definitely in the recruiting space, specifically in verticals like accounting and finance, human resources, and supply chain. And right now, I focus on a direct hire basis. Looking to expand, of course, in the future. That's probably something we might talk about, is some of the growth that we anticipate as far as adding people on and different ways to scale the business, especially when you're solo by yourself.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Yeah, I had my own little time as a staffing recruiter. I had a company called Whole Person Staffing back in the day, and that I did more like your property accountants, property
Hmm.
management, and executive assistants, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean it's a wild world, especially right now with everything that's going on. One of the things I wrote an article about was all this AI interviewing stuff because it's like you have an AI speaking to an AI, and then it's at one point is it going to be an actual human speaking to a human again? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's so true. The human touch is never going anywhere, right? And it shouldn't, at least. But of course, nowadays, I've seen reports as well talking about how much just content out there isn't human anymore because people are relying on AI tools, and that's absolutely where part of, I think, the Parable Talent name comes from, is trying to be in a human connection. I love your sign in the background. Talks about tell your story, because that's exactly what the Parable Talent is about. Is like, hey, everybody has a story that goes beyond just their resume that might be screened out in certain cases from different ATS systems, or the client side, right? They've got a story of the right culture that they're trying to build or maintain, and the right kind of people that make sense for that opening. It's not just, because you have the same job title that you're the fit. It's like, you got to make sure you're making a great match. A lot of times that goes into really knowing the person and the story that they bring.
Yeah, and what I think as I was previously a recruiter is it's really all about the soft skills. It's about the soft, at least when you're a recruiter, because at the end of the day, as a recruiter, you're not going to be an expert in every single technical thing that you're studying, right? Or that you're recruiting for. But what you can understand pretty well is soft skills and how well that person is telling their story, because right now you have like an AI creating a resume, which an AI is then scanning that resume, and then you have an AI interviewing the person, and the person's trying to go on AI to say the answers and everything, and it's just like it's like when does it end? But when you're telling a story or a parable, you can really sense the authenticity in that when it's your story.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, if you think about like so many, I'm just thinking factors, right? Look at like job hopping, right? The phrase,
Mhm.
every hiring manager hates to see a resume that's job hoppy. But if you're able to dig in and understand, hey, what was the real reason for leaving? Maybe they had an opportunity they couldn't pass up. And then unfortunately, with no fault of their own, but that company fizzled out or had to declare bankruptcy. It's like, that's not really their fault, but that might be why there might have been some short tenures, and being able to really talk through that, or in other cases, I've had some really amazing candidates where, their brother or sister needed help taking on the family business. So they had to kind of jump on to kind of maintain the ship of the family business, but they didn't want to stay there long term. So that's why there might have been a shorter stint, or, a job hoppy kind of look to the resume. But again, understand the story behind it, you'll realize, okay, why did they make those choices? Other things that they might be able to bring that are beyond just, the resume or the short gap in that instance. And again, there's a lot of value that someone can bring just purely from those soft skills, like you mentioned. But here's the one thing I'll talk about: soft skills. People and hire managers specifically, you have to understand when they're hiring, there's a luxury of filtering by culture fit. What I mean by
Hmm.
that is some roles, like, yeah, there's a very limited people that might have that skill set. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's some technical roles out there where it's really hard to find. In those instances, those roles are going to be open longer because those clients or hiring managers have what I would say the a higher requirement of finding the right culture fit, which they should. But at the same time, there's an urgency of like it might be a while before you kind of get culture fit and technical skill set. So a lot of times I try to educate my clients of like, hey, if they're matching, 70% of the job requirements, but they are the culture fit, you should probably move on that person, right? Because you can
Yeah.
train the other pieces, but you're not going to be able to really train culture fit or personality.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I mean, and that's such a big piece. And I like to kind of go off of the more how do you say, the subjective stuff, because it's those culture fits, personality fits that are more kind of subjective, where it's like, of course we can take, especially in the like the software engineering and coding side of things, right? You take a coding assessment, and he can be there in flying colors. You can get 100%, but then when you speak to him or her, it's not very easy to work with them. They're kind of like, they think they know it all, and they're not like a pleasure to work with. And all those things really matter when they can't really communicate what they did or how they got to their work or anything. They can just do it. Well,
Yeah.
that doesn't really create a very good team environment. So there's all these other pieces that I like to talk about more, the intangibles,
Hmm.
where a lot of people go into the tangible stuff, the objective
Absolutely.
stuff.
That yeah, those intangibles, you can't speak enough about them because ultimately you're sitting next to that person, especially if it's an in-office environment, right? Or even remote, if you're communicating with that person over video, throughout the day, you're talking to that person more than you talk to potentially people you live with, right? And sit next to them every day if you're in office. And so those
Yeah,
are absolutely key. And again, even going back to the AI being everywhere, and again, it's not even a buzzword anymore, it's just the norm, now. It's just you got to think, yes, there's tools that can maybe do some of the systematic or the task or the analysis, for example, of different aspects, but you still need people that can communicate it. You still need people that have the critical thinking behind it. And I was talking to a couple CPA firms recently, and they've got AI tools that are basically doing the accounting now. So they're like, we don't need people that are really technical accountants, but we need people that can absolutely talk to a client and engage and be able to kind of use the data or the trends and be able to really communicate what it means, right? And so
hundred
that's
percent,
where
100%.
critical thinking and human element still always will come back.
Yeah, and a big part of recruiting, if you're going to be either on the business development side as the account executive speaking to clients, or going to be in the sourcing side with recruiting, the big piece on that is outreach. Outreach is a big piece either way. So with for from where I stand, I talk a lot about outbound marketing and doing outreach, and that's really changed a lot now too. Especially with jobs and everything, where now we can kind of look at job signals, and you can say, okay, this company has X amount of job postings available, and if you look at 6 months, they've been growing headcount 10%. So it just like, you're talking about with accounting and you're reading the data and everything. Nowadays, it's not everywhere, because, I can look at a company and say, okay, well, this company is growing headcount over the last 6 months or 12 months by 20%. Say, I'm going to reach out to them because that's going to be good for, growing my business, right? Like
Hmm.
hireable staffing. You know, how has outbound been working for you, and using outreach in that sense for yourself?
Yeah, and as you're talking, it kind of reminded me of a couple tools I use, and give a quick plug to LinkedIn. They've got a tool called Talent Insights, where it can basically show some of that supply and demand, or what percentage that company has grown over the X amount of months, and so you can kind of identify some of that data to help you be more just strategic and targeted in your approach of like what kind of roles they hire, maybe who they hire from, those kinds of things. But the other piece too, which I think some people can get a little away from sometimes still goes back to that you got to make a connection, right? And I've used tools myself that are maybe a little bit more AI outbound messaging with limited success. I'd say, like, actually, I don't want to name the name of who I use, but it was like 0 leads in 4 months, right? Now, when I kind of sat back and said, okay, I took that investment. I, paid this amount of money to try to use some sort of automated outbound system that I thought was going to work, and just sending out to these mass contacts. But truthfully, it wasn't the true ICP, right? It wasn't the customer profile that I needed. And they were going after just anybody that had owner, founder, CEO, and it wasn't like really the people that I need to talk to that are decision makers. And especially like you're saying, the AI tools that give you insights of like, hey, these people are hiring right now. Well, that's most likely the kind of hiring branch you want to talk to, of course, but also if you can get in front of it. And that's where when I used to be a trainer, when I was at LHH, we used to always say that, the relationships of talking to hiring managers before they have a need. Well, that's where the real gold is, because now you're getting a call before they hire versus you're chasing them when the posting's out there, right? And now you're one of 15, 20 agencies probably calling that same hiring manager trying to get the job order, right? And so again, that relationship will always be key. But again, if there's tools out there that can help you make insightful decisions, be more targeted, strategic, just like you were talking about, and having that kind of talent insight, that is definitely going to help you with where you spend your time, where you pick up the phone. But nothing replaces picking up the phone.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of like, especially for the recruiting game, it's
Mm-hmm.
the game is on the phone, and end of the day, you have to just make a connection, like you're saying, right? You have
Absolutely.
to just make a connection. So hopping on the phone usually does that. The things that can definitely help, is really just discerning or deciding what is your engaged audience, right? That is kind of your biggest steps now. And from what I'm seeing, you know, when I do campaigns, I'm always trying to look at, okay, who's like clicking the most, who's the most engaged, and then also using, again, like signals. One of the best signals we've seen is, new leadership. When
Mm-hmm.
there's new leadership change, right? If there's a CHRO change, or if there's a COO change, then they're probably looking to get some new people in, a new agency. So, it's again, it's looking at all these different signals to say, okay, this is where we should go. And then going over to more like the candidate side, I use the same way, which most people don't think about, because when you're a candidate and you're trying to get a position, you're selling yourself. You know,
Absolutely.
so it's like having that research, knowing your company that you're working for is really important. Do you find that the candidates that are researched, that know about the company, kind of do well?
Yeah, I'd say that's something that I go through during the kind of screening or discovery call with them is first of all, yes, knowing the candidate, right, what they're looking for. Then if I already have a job kind of in mind that I've more or less pre-matched them to, then I usually ask what kind of research they've done, right? Because that kind of shows, okay, do they, truly have an interest? Are they actually on the market, or are they just testing the market? That's one part of it too. But also the piece is when we go into from a client, I'm going to go through with them. That's just kind of the service I provide as a recruiter of like, hey, these are certain questions you might want to ask, right? Based on what they're looking for. That's going to help highlight or sell yourself a little better. But then two, I want to make sure, as you know this, the questions are not like compensation and benefits focused, but they're absolutely more about like the long-term strategy, or how can I play a part or be an impact player? How can I be a game changer kind of person in this new role? And also, I always tell them to be prepared. Like, not every client's going to ask this, but I wouldn't be surprised if the hiring manager said, hey, tell me what you know about us. It's an interesting question, right? And sometimes that's going to help kind of trigger, hey, did this person do their research or not? And I remember
Yeah.
one time, even on a client visit myself, like trying to earn the business for a company, that was the first thing the CFO asked me, like, hey, tell me what you know about us. And so luckily I researched them, so I was able to give a quick blurb and, sound
Yeah.
educated. But I know a lot of recruiters out there that may not do the research ahead of time, where that kind of is a big signal right away that they're probably not the right partner in that case for that job search.
And then going into like finding the right partner, and going into like, the right kind of company. There's a lot of different like angles you can play with that. I mean, you can kind of go into it just like with like I'm like just really passionate about the company, and I've always loved to work here, kind of thing, or the angle of just like I've been in this industry for a long time, and I know how the talent kind of plays in this in this market, if you will, and then you know can work at from that angle, right? Because I know that for me, like when I was really early in staffing, I tried to get into like video game studios because they're like, wouldn't it be cool to recruit for video game studios? And I had no like industry experience in that, and that like didn't work too well.
Yeah, no, that's it's definitely more technical than you think, right? When talking
Yeah,
about the programmers and developers, especially, but yeah, from a being able to, I think, understand the language and being able to kind of bring some sort of industry knowledge, right? That's going to separate the people that they want to work with from people that are just kind of a vendor trying to knock on the door, right? And that was actually where I would say I kind of hit a stride. Some of the best years I had in recruiting was because I was specifically working with a lot of manufacturing companies here in my market. And so obviously I was well connected locally anyways, which always helps. But then secondly, I had worked with several, and just thinking specifically in High Point, North Carolina, which is where I grew up. They're known to be the furniture capital of the world, right? So they got several furniture manufacturing companies still that are here, still existent, and still that, fully operational and growing. And so when I was working with some of the furniture companies, well, naturally I started to develop a stronger talent pool in that industry, right? And so whenever people kind of moved, or the puzzle pieces moved around, I was able to kind of connect the dots and identify, oh, this is what they look for. This is the kind of industry background. And obviously, yes, there's other factors outside of industry. I would say if you can ever match software, and then of course the soft skill thing we talked about, culture, right? Those are three pretty big must haves in most situations. They got industry experience, they've got the software experience, and their culture fit. That's usually a pretty good sign that's candidates at least worth a conversation.
yeah, yeah, because they're pretty much plug and play. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're plug like, you already know the accounting software or whatever software that they're using. They already kind of mesh with the culture and everything there, and they know the industry. I mean, it's as close as easy match that you can get, like, because that's what
Mm-hmm.
people want for the most part in recruiting, is that, like, plug and play, or just, like, you're bringing productivity and all that kinda stuff to the company right when you start working there.
Absolutely. Yep. And from a hiring manager, right, you're lessening, you're decreasing the risk, right? Is like, okay, I got less time that I'm going to have to invest in this person to get them up to speed, and just like you said, you're shortening that ramp up time. So yeah, those are definitely things that I used to train on, but also that I'm always looking for whenever I'm trying to make a match. Is like, hey, can I get as many of those box items checked before I submit this candidate?
100%. Yeah, I agree. So, as we kind of get to the end of this podcast episode, I wanted to ask you just briefly, what were some of the challenges that came up for you in growing your business? Because I know that, being a new business owner isn't always the easiest thing. And I was just curious, what were some of the things that came up for you as you were, going on your business journey?
Yeah. So a little backstory, I would say a fairly high producer before I moved into a kind of training focus when I was with LHH. So I was running a desk for a while, then COVID happened. And during that time, I had an opportunity to move into like a newly created role for the training department, which was centralized at the time. So technically I moved out of production from 2021 until I left LHH, basically May of 2025. So 4 years not being in a production role, that's definitely a challenge, is jumping right back into production, of like building your book of business again. It's not like I'm jumping into a place where I've got all these accounts I can call on, right? Now, I do remember some names, the hiring managers, of course, that I wanted to reconnect with. But you'll be surprised how much changes in 4 years, right? Either they
Yeah.
might have relocated, or they're not the same company anymore, or, different things. Maybe that company got absorbed by another company, right? There's a lot of different changes can happen during that time. So really rebuilding my book of business was, step one, of course, but also getting a new system in place. Like I'd always been used to working with Bullhorn and having a different tech stack while I was at LHH, and then being able to kind of identify, hey, okay, what tech stack do I want now that I get a chance to kind of make it my own? And so that was definitely a fun part because I kind of geek out on that stuff too, of like how I can make the most of the tech that I'm using. But I say the biggest challenge is this. I think for anybody that's starting a business, it's the mental approach when you're by yourself. Because you don't really have
Yeah.
other people that know the ins and outs. Like obviously you might have a partner you can talk to, and you might have other like business advisors you can reach out to. But once you doing the work day in, day out, it's a mental grind, especially as you're building it. And one thing that I like to say, talk about a little bit of resilience, was my first 3 deals flopped. And it was always because these random cases. Like one of them was a reference check situation, like home run on paper, candidate did, phenomenal during the interview process. But when we checked on the references, we found out he actually lied as to why he left. And so right away, it's like, hey, I'm not going to, put an offer for someone that started that relationship out on the wrong foot. Right. And
Yeah.
so that one fell through. Another one fell through where we had the offer for the candidate, and then she literally just went to the doctor that day and found out that she couldn't work for the next 6 months. It's like that came out of nowhere. She had no idea. We had the
Out of
offer in
nowhere.
hand. She
Out of
wouldn't
nowhere.
she wouldn't have gone through the interview process if she knew that. And then if she went to the doctor, found out she can't work for the next 6 months because she had to go through a pretty serious operation. Luckily, she's doing great now. Another one just fell through just simply because they were the top candidate the entire process. That was a communication back and forth. And then all of a sudden they get to the finalist or the final stage, and then an internal pops out of nowhere. Those things
Internal
happen,
pops out of nowhere.
right?
Yeah.
And so
That's
those things happen,
classic.
but
Classic.
it's just
Yeah.
like this first 3 deals fell through, and I'm thinking, man, like mentally, it's like you kind of lose confidence a little bit. Like, can I still do this? Right?
Yeah. That's
And
true,
then
man. It's
but
real
then I was
true.
able to kind of push through and just realize, hey, I'm fortunate enough to get to that place where I was basically so close to landing those 3 deals. I need to press through. I need to just continue pressing forward and doing the things that I know work. And again, it comes back down to relationship building, building trust, obviously being able to understand people's story and understand how that human connection really you can leverage that, but also how it separates you from so many people out there that are just only AI or only tech focused, and they lose that human touch.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree so much. It's really all about getting away from this like transactional mentality.
Hmm.
And that's why I have always liked direct hires a lot more too myself, because the temp stuff kind of tends to be a little bit more transactional, and you can't really build up that relationship as much. And so yeah, I 100% agree. It's always that mental game, trying to keep going no matter what, never giving up. And you know, if you got that, you're pretty much, you're gonna win. It's like, yeah, I think of Sun Tzu, Art of War or something, but it's like the people that win in a battle are the people that decide they're gonna win before ever fighting.
Mm, love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, a lot of it just comes down to mindset again, right? Funny enough, I remember seeing, I think it was just like a reel actually, but it was talking about what separates like the top athletes from just average athletes, and it talks about they have a winning story that's in their mind, whether it's an example of how they overcame this situation before, right? And so when they get down, they're not automatically beat. It's like, no, I've done this before, right? I've come back, so it's not out of reach, right? But people that maybe don't have that comeback story or don't have that, example of overcoming some sort of objection or adversity, right? They don't necessarily have that story that they can hold on to. They're like, hey, I'm still in this, right?
Yeah. It's
And
huge.
that's such a big part is going into it with that positive mindset.
Huge. Yeah, well, I think for now we're gonna get to the end of this episode. As we close, I'd always like to ask: was there any book or maybe a podcast or movie or anything that kind of inspired you along as you think about your business and really just your growth in general?
Yeah, I'd say one that's really stuck out for me was the book Unreasonable Hospitality. I read it actually a couple years ago, but that was actually one of the just called breakthrough items that helped me get an account that I'm in now. Was I was able to really connect with the president because he also read the book, had the same methodology, and really it's about going above and beyond for your customers, right? Whether it's a service or a good, of just like really thinking, hey, they may not expect that kind of service, right? And when you do that, that's going to now create a different emotion, right? There's a connection to that service or to that environment, which says, hey, I want to use that person again, or I want to be able to work with that person versus it was just a transaction or just a vendor. It truly goes to that partnership mentality. And so that's a great book. Highly recommend it. It's actually one of the books that's featured in the show The Bear, if anybody's seen that. But
Okay.
yeah, so it's a great
Pretty
book.
cool. Well, thanks so much for getting on here, Rodie. We appreciate you here. And if anyone wants to contact you, what is a good way to contact you? Is there like a LinkedIn or website or email or anything like that?
Yeah, you can, of course, look me up at Mikel Rodenberg on LinkedIn. And of course, my email address for anybody that sees my name listed down here, it's just Mikel, Mikel Rodenberg, Rodenberg, at parable-talent.com.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, this is the Growth Mindset Podcast signing off. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, David.